Hello everyone and welcome back to Bombchu. Today we'll be taking a look at the Humble Choice Bundle for June of 2021. Summer is almost officially here. Unofficially, I've already been sunburned once after spending about 30 minutes outside, so I'd say we're safe to call this the start of the summer season. And what better way to start your summer vacation than with a bundle of games? Did Humble deliver on the summertime jams, or did we all get burned? Let's jump right into the games and find out.
This month's Humble original is Fistful of Nothing. Once again, Humble has provided no information about the game on their website, and I'm gonna keep calling them out until they start properly featuring their Humble originals. Fistful of Nothing is a top-down stealth game where you are trying to make it to the end of each floor without getting shot. Initially, if you're spotted, you'll have to hope for the best and try to put walls and objects between you and your enemy. But as you get further, you get a gun, which your character is uncomfortable with shooting. So you can point the gun at your enemies to keep them from shooting you, although this doesn't seem to work consistently. I got shot several times while aiming at an enemy and trying to pass through a door to escape the room. Speaking of doors, I found myself frequently getting stuck on doors and walls that were just a little too tight to pass through naturally. Also, levels ramp up in difficulty very fast, and often when I would complete a level, I felt like I had played through it the wrong way, but I didn't have a good idea of what was the right way to make it through. This one feels like it was rushed out to meet the bundle deadline. With some time to polish up the mechanics, and a lot more time to spend on the level designs, I could see myself having a better time with this game. Even so, at that point I feel like it would be Hotline Miami with the most fun part cut out, brutally killing all the bad guys in a perfect run through each floor. I don't suspect we'll ever hear about Fistful of Nothing again, but if we do, I hope it gets some more time in the oven before then.
Disjunction is a stealth action game from developer 8 Tribe Games and released in January earlier this year. Disjunction is set in a cyberpunk dystopian future during the year 2048. A local community leader is framed for the murder of a policeman, as well as possession of a deadly new street drug known as Shard. Our first main character is Frank Monroe, a private detective tasked with solving the case. Soon we're introduced to our two other main characters, Lockjaw, an underground boxer, and Spider, a hacker. The three character stories begin to intertwine as a larger conspiracy is revealed. The plot and setting are intriguing, if not the most original or presented in the best way. There's a lot of reading, including certain words during dialogue being highlighted for more details on that specific topic should the player wish to delve deeper into the world. However, while this kind of info dump isn't the most intuitive way to get players into your setting, luckily it's not entirely necessary to figure out the basics of what's going on. You might not know or understand what Shard is, or what the different political parties in play are, but you generally know who the good guys and the bad guys are, and sometimes that's good enough. Gameplay is where Disjunction really shines. Disjunction plays like a cyberpunk version of something like Hotline Miami. You'll be sneaking around, dodging sight cones of enemies, cameras, and drones, while attempting to go from shadow to shadow, taking out your enemies along the way. Each character can do a non-lethal melee strike, a lethal range strike, as well as a few other special abilities to help you handle different situations. For example, Frank has a smoke grenade he can use to block vision, while Lockjaw can do a fast charge into enemies who are far away. It makes playing as each character feel unique, while still keeping enough of the same core elements between them that swapping is never disorienting. You'll need to get good at using these abilities, because Disjunction is hard. Checkpoints are few and far between, and if you're not a master of the shadows and your abilities, you are going to die. In just the first few levels, I found myself dying quite a bit once exposed by an enemy's vision. The game's Steam page claims that you're able to play the way you want, either stealthily or attacking head-on, but that really doesn't feel like that's the case. Sure, most situations don't require Splinter Cell levels of stealth, but just rushing into a room and trying to shoot everything that moves is a recipe for disaster in almost every scenario that I had come across. Luckily, the stealth aspects of the gameplay are very well executed, and Disjunction ends up being a lot of fun to play. The difficulty can feel like a bit much at times, but Disjunction is such a well-crafted experience that I don't mind replaying these levels a few times to get through them. If you're a fan of Hotline Miami or stealth gameplay in general, you'll definitely want to check out Disjunction.
Effie is a 3D action platformer starring Galland, a man who has been cursed with old age by a witch for being lazy. Let me start off by saying I saw this screenshot from the store page and was instantly interested in playing it. Surfing and going fast in a colorful world? Sweet. Sadly, the game did not hold up to my hopes. The plot is really awful, and it feels like the kind of storytelling you might encounter from a 6-year-old making up a fairy tale on the fly. and the narrator is always around narrating what you're doing. Press a button for an action you don't have yet, the narrator pops in to tell you that Galland hadn't learned how to do that yet. Open a chest, Galland is filled with an urge? What? Speaking of chests, you'll have to mash B to open them for some reason while you watch a janky animation. Movement is fine. Levels and platforming areas are set up to be pretty easy to find and reach everything. There are floating objects and chests to collect, which grant you experience towards leveling up. I wasn't able to get any details on what all level ups do for you, but my health did go up significantly. The combat... oh lord, what do I say about the combat? Look at it. You go flying all over the place, targeting feels inconsistent, and I generally felt I did about as well just mashing attack as I did trying to fight with any sort of strategy. Now let's come back to the screenshot that pulled me in here. Did I get to do any surfing? Well yes, I did. After beating the first level, I was able to surf across the world to the next level. It lasted less than 40 seconds and was underwhelming, which is exactly how my prom date described our night together to all of her friends. Effie doesn't provide any real challenge, and the moment-to-moment gameplay isn't fun enough for me to just enjoy safely exploring around. I will say, if you have a toddler that you want to teach the basics of playing 3D games on a controller, and they haven't already learned it all playing Fortnite on your tablet, this would probably be a good fit.
Paw 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 is a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up from developer Simpleton and released in November of last year. The game takes place in the kingdom of Paw Paw Paw, which just feels stupid to say, no matter the context. This kingdom is run by animals, including the king of Paw 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 himself. The kingdom is hit with a strange red rock from outer space, and the king turns evil. What makes him so evil? He wants to force all the animals to start wearing pants. Pants! How dare he do something so loathsome and vile? Players will pick from one of 4 starting classes, each with their own strengths and playstyles, as they venture through a series of side-scrolling beat-em-up stages. Each character has 2 basic attacks, 2 special skills they can use when they have enough energy, a dodge roll, and a block. As you progress through the stages, you'll find new weapons for each class, level up classes as you play them in order to unlock new skills and abilities, as well as discover new allies along the way. It's a pretty basic beat-em-up formula with some added RPG flair, but it's all very basic at its core. Everything about this game just felt kind of cheap and mediocre to me. The visuals are just okay, with nothing really standing out to me personally from a design or execution standpoint. The music is absolutely atrocious, and it sounded like it was being played through a sad old synthesizer that's stuck on some kind of fart setting. The combat feels nice at times, and when you get into a certain rhythm of clearing enemies, it can be satisfying. However, little problems kept popping up, like attacks not hitting at the depth they look like they should be, or getting chain knocked down by a big swarm of enemies until dead. There's also smaller problems, like the time between clearing a wave of enemies and either the next wave appearing or the continue sign popping up feels like it takes way too long. It might seem like a minor nitpick, but fans of beat-em-up games will tell you that gap feeling too long really breaks the flow of gameplay. Overall, Paw 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 isn't a terrible game, and I'm sure playing local co-op with a couple of buddies could bring some fun for an hour or 2. However, the whole experience was very mediocre, and it just felt like it was 1 or 2 steps above a Newgrounds Flash game. Hardcore beat-em-up fans will probably enjoy having another game in their preferred genre they can play, but for everyone else, including myself, I'd recommend spending your time elsewhere.
Ikenfell is a turn-based tactical RPG following a group of magic-using students. If this looks and sounds familiar, it's because a sneak peek demo for the game was included in the June 2020 Humble Choice bundle. Here's what we had to say about it last time. Combat is where you'll be spending a lot of your time in this, so let's start with that. Battles take place on a grid where you and your opponents can move around and use positional spells. There's a timing element for attacking and blocking similar to the Mario RPG games, where if you tap the button at the right moment during an attack, you'll do extra damage, take less damage, or improve a buff or heal. For some moves, the timing is pretty obvious, but for others, there's a bit of trial and error, and the timing felt a little too tight for some moves. But that may just be my old man reflexes starting to dull. When you aren't in combat, you're traversing a neat school campus, although in my footage here, I'm obviously just going through the woods because the first chapter was skipped in the demo. Enemies can be seen on the field, though some may pop out of the ground to surprise you. Either way, they can mostly be avoided, and any game with non-random encounters is doing something right in my book. The demo started in Chapter 2, and back when I played that, I was really not invested in the story, but I see why the demo started there, as Chapter 1 is a bit slow and you only have one character to work with. That said, I got more of the story, and while it's nothing groundbreaking, it definitely works for keeping things moving forward. Also, that first boss makes great use of the battle grid and gives a nice introduction to thinking strategically within the battle system. Graphically, I'm a bit divided. I love the character portraits, but I'm not so in love with the tiny low-detail overworld sprites. I don't hate them by any means, but I have to look at them most of the time, and the character portraits just look so much better. Music though? Great music. Personally, I didn't have enough fun with the combat to want to keep playing, given it's such a major part of the game. That said, I will be revisiting the soundtrack. If the battle system looks like fun to you, I'd suggest giving it a try.
Desolate is a first-person cooperative horror survival game from the indie developer Nerga and published by Hype Train Digital. In Desolate, you play as a member of a research team exploring an island in Russia during the Soviet era, trying to understand and potentially reverse the damage caused by a Russian scientist named Victor. The game does a great job of setting up the story for the player by having the tutorial of the game be the prologue of the story. During the prologue, you not only get familiar with the story, but also the game mechanics such as basic controls for movement, combat, and the survival elements such as health, hunger, thirst, temperature, and stress. The prologue is completely optional, but I would suggest it for anyone looking to give this game a try. After the prologue, Desolate drops you in an open world environment, which is where you will be exploring, questing, crafting, and engaging in combat. This is pretty standard for this genre, so none of these should be too surprising. Desolate doesn't particularly stand out genre-wise, however, the story and overall presentation of the game did surprise me. The story was rather interesting, and I really enjoyed the voice acting of the player character, which is important because you hear his voice quite a lot. The game environment was also really spooky, and I definitely jumped more than once. I'm a bit of a novice with the horror genre, so take that as you will. I had a pretty solid experience with the gameplay. The survival elements didn't ruin the game experience for me, and with some survival games, that can happen quite easily. It's a problem when you are more worried about hunger than where you will explore next. Desolate isn't perfect though. The menu system is a bit clunky, and that's not great for a game where you are going to be managing your inventory as well as crafting. The combat was also pretty bland after the first few fights. The game does, however, have a really good leveling system, where it will recommend perks to you, which is nice to see, since sometimes it can be hard to pick which perk you want as they all sound good. Overall, I really enjoyed what I played of Desolate. I was getting some Dying Light, We Happy Few, and Generation Zero vibes, so if you enjoy any of those games, I would recommend it. Oh yeah, and the game has 4-player co-op, which I can see really elevating the game experience. Don't let being a lone wolf scare you from checking out Desolate though. I played it solo and really enjoyed it. I plan on getting a small group together and playing through this one a bit more. It may not be the best in the genre, but it's definitely not the worst.
Milky Way Prince, The Vampire Star is a visual novel developed by iGuys and released in August of last year. Milky Way Prince puts you in the shoes of Nuki, a young and somewhat troubled person obsessed with the titular fairy tale of the Milky Way Prince. Nuki is in love with the stars and seeks love therein. One day, Nuki sees a shooting star, and upon following it meets a strange man named Sune. Sune at least claims to be that shooting star, and the two begin a summer relationship together. Milky Way Prince is one of those metaphor games, where the entire premise and story is trying to convey some heavy themes and ideas through a simple game interface. In this case, it's all about abusive relationships and borderline personality disorder, and it definitely delves into the darker side of those topics. The writing is pretty good overall, but it can feel a bit inhuman and strange at times, although I feel that that's by design. Everything from the dialogues to the visuals feels very otherworldly, like you're visiting a dimension just between our world and another. It's very Lynchian, and this whole game feels like what would happen if David Lynch made a visual novel based on a bad relationship he once had. You're falling in love with a star! Stars explode! Sometimes there's music, but then sometimes there's not. Also butterflies, but not the metaphorical kind. Actual butterflies. Get Kale on the phone, he'll do it. In the end, I found myself utterly baffled but transfixed by what I had experienced. I understood what the story was trying to tell me, even if I didn't necessarily understand each individual piece of it. The game is almost an assault on the senses, in the fact that you're never given quite enough time to truly settle down and relax before something slightly terrifying or vexing occurs. However, despite the somewhat nebulous design of the overall game, I couldn't stop myself once I started, and I found myself wondering what the other endings could possibly entail for these characters. If you're a fan of the metaphor type of game, and especially if you're a fan of the works of David Lynch, I think you'll find something to enjoy during your time with the Milky Way Prince. If all of this sounds too artsy for you, and you're not a fan of visual novels to begin with, I don't know how much you'll get out of this experience. Personally, I'm glad I gave this game a chance, and I would love to go back and explore some of those other story branches.
Panzer Paladin is an NES-style action platformer that has you playing as Flame, a squire pilot who has been paired with Grit, the Paladin power armor. You'll spend most of your time in the power armor, as it has gobs of health and a lot more movement options. You can punch enemies with your fists, or you can take their weapons to increase your reach and hit power. Weapons have limited durability, and you can only carry a few at a time. You can use them to whack enemies normally, throw them to attack from far away, or you can purposely break them early to trigger an effect. Each weapon has a different effect, but some examples are healing yourself, destroying all enemies on screen, increasing defense, etc. You also use weapons to activate checkpoints. Yes, to get a checkpoint, you will have to leave a weapon behind. If you die and respawn there, you have the option of taking the weapon so you're armed with more than just your fists, but this will deactivate the checkpoint, so it adds a lot of risk, and I think this checkpoint system is really cool. On occasion, you'll need to move through a tight corridor, or you might lose all of Grit's health. At this point, you'll leave the power armor and start walking around as Flame, who has a Castlevania-style whip. This one is super fun, and quite challenging. Checkpoints aren't super frequent after the first level, and you may find yourself losing a ton of progress and replaying long segments of the game. So if you usually hate games like that, you might try playing on easy or steer clear entirely. But if you enjoy some of the best tough NES games, or modern games that strive to be like them, such as Cyber Shadow, absolutely give this one a go. Oh yeah, I should mention, there is a story. I wasn't really getting anything out of it, but I will say the cutscene visuals are amazing. 8-bit pixel art anime goodness with an emphasis on being flashy. I'm looking forward to playing more of this one for sure.
Going Under is a dungeon crawler from developer AgroCrab and released in September of last year. Going Under puts you in the shoes of Jacqueline, a new intern at a trendy tech company. However, they haven't hired you for anything normal like fetching coffee or filing paperwork. Instead, you're tasked with clearing out all the monsters from the basement. What? You didn't know that there was a dungeon of monsters in the basement of every tech company? Well, now you do, and it's your job to kill them all, using whatever you can get your hands on. The style and presentation does a lot to elevate Going Under above all the other dungeon crawlers out there. The graphics are simple, but incredibly colorful, and the character and enemy designs have all been pretty great so far. The writing is also spot on, with some genuine laugh-out-loud moments hitting pretty early on in the game. However, Going Under isn't just about the style, it's also got some quality substance to back it up. Combat is fairly simple when you first approach it, with a basic attack and dodge mechanic. However, your weapons are whatever is laying around in the environment, and I do mean literally whatever is laying around. In the first couple of stages, I found myself using giant pencils, spears, swords, bones, keyboards, boxes, thumbtacks, and crossbows in my fight against the monsters. Each weapon has different qualities and methods of attacking, so even though your core mechanics are simple, each fight ends up feeling unique based on what weapons you have on you. As you explore, you'll also be given the chance to pick up some passive skills that alter your abilities in some way. For example, one of the skills I found started dropping bombs whenever I would execute a dodge roll. If you make use of these skills enough while you have them, you'll be able to set them as a permanent skill before venturing down into the dungeon, adding to your already somewhat vast arsenal of methods to approach combat. Going Under is also pretty hard, and enemies will overwhelm you pretty quickly if you're not paying attention. Not only do you have to keep an eye on the monsters, but also the layout of the room, what weapons you came in with, and what weapons are scattered around the room that might mean the difference between life and death. Overall, I ended up having way more fun with Going Under than I was expecting. The colorful and unique art style drew me in, but the surprisingly simple but varied combat kept me playing. Going Under is definitely worth checking out, and while I might not stick around long enough to beat it, I wouldn't mind playing through a few more levels from time to time.
Worms Rumble is a 2.5D real-time action game from our good friends at Team 17. I say our good friends because as humble subscribers, we aren't exactly strangers to the work of Team 17. Several games of theirs have been in previous bundles, and this is just another one to add to the Team 17 collection. Now let's see what they have for us this time. Worms Rumble is not like the Worms games that you have grown up with. It's more of a spin-off of the mainline series. Personally, it's been quite a while since I played a Worms game. I think my last one being Worms 2, but historically I have loved the franchise. I am even the proud owner of Worms Armageddon on Game Boy Color. I wouldn't consider myself the biggest fan, but I did quite enjoy it back in the day. Now, what separates Worms Rumble from the main series games is that it's in real time. Everyone is moving their worm simultaneously, and it actually works quite well. The gameplay feels pretty solid overall. It still has the variety of weapons and gadgets that any Worms fan will be familiar with, such as the jetpack, holy hand grenade, and the shotgun, but it also throws some fun new ones in there. The The game is presented as your typical online multiplayer service game. You have 2 multiplayer modes, with each mode having a team variant. After each game, you gain experience, which unlocks cosmetics that can be purchased. No, your ears didn't play a trick on you. Once you reach a certain level, you don't unlock the cosmetic. It becomes available for purchase with the in-game currency that you earned while playing the game. Essentially, that's the whole game. That is Worms Rumble in a nutshell. Is it revolutionary? Not at all. Are you going to be telling your friends about this one? Nah, but it was a good time. One thing that should be noted is that it can take some time to find a game, and the lobbies never fill up to the 32-player limit. It's not an unbearable amount of time, and the game does have crossplay, which should help keep the time down in the future, but it was a bit of a bummer to never have a full game. Overall, I would recommend Worms Rumble to anyone who was a fan of the Worms franchise back in the day. But if you don't have that nostalgia, I think your time may be better spent playing either another game in the series or another online multiplayer service game with a bit of a larger player base. It's not a bad game, but it's not something to write home about either.
Stubbs the Zombie in Rebel Without a Pulse is a remaster of the 2005 Xbox game, which was a sleeper title best known for and marketed as using the Halo 1 engine. This game is very dated, and the developers know it. You get an achievement for completing the tutorial called That Didn't Age Well, with a description of Complete the Painfully Slow Force Tutorial. This is a game from another era entirely, so be prepared. Despite coming from the Halo engine, this remaster is not quite as involved as Halo Anniversary. Models and textures still look very much like they did years ago, but the bump up in resolution is a welcome one. While in control of Stubbs, there's a green filter placed over the screen intended to act as Zombovision, but thankfully an update was added to remove this, and I personally recommend doing so. Oh, right, we need to talk about what the game is. You play as Stubbs, a zombie hungry for brains in the retro-futuristic town of Punch Bowl. Everything is stylized like it's in the 50s, but this town has some futuristic tech like hover cars and robots. Like I said, Stubbs is hungry for brains, and one of your main attacks is to go for a munch on human heads when they're turned away from you or stunned. Doing this will heal you a bit, as well as add a zombie to your horde to help take out other enemies, which is super handy because, trust me, you do not want to take on a group of armed police alone. As you play, you'll unlock other abilities like a huge fart that stuns everyone in a large area, and the ability to toss your organs, which explode like grenades. You can even drive hover tanks. Yeah, a zombie driving a hover tank in the 50s. Who would have guessed? This is a weird relic of the past, and as someone who played it way back when and was already interested in playing the remaster, well, even I didn't have a perfect time playing it. The humor is about as subtle as a sledgehammer, and it's not always clear where to go when the game doesn't provide a waypoint. It's definitely not going to be for everyone, and my guess is that if you aren't much older than the original Xbox version, this is probably not going to be your cup of tea. That said, if you grew up on this era of games, or are curious about some of the oddball titles from that time that not everyone has played, Stubbs can definitely provide an interesting time. It's a bit short and a bit repetitive, but there certainly is something fun about building up your zombie army and wreaking havoc on the perfect little town of Punch Bowl. Secret Neighbor is an asymmetric multiplayer game set in the neighbor's house from Hello Neighbor. 6 kids enter the game, 5 of them are legit, and 1 of them is the neighbor in disguise. The kids have a goal of unlocking the basement to free their friend, and the neighbor must set traps and take out each of the kids one at a time. I couldn't figure out how to join a match as the neighbor, so it may be randomly selected each round. But playing as a kid, whew, it's a lot to take in. You'll be looking for items that you can use to stun the neighbor in case he comes after you or grabs one of the other kids, and you'll also be looking for keys and key cards so that you can make your way through all the locked doors and down into the basement to victory. I played a match where the neighbor left the game at the start, and I almost ran out of time just trying to figure out where all the keys were that I needed, even when I could freely explore. Similar to Hello Neighbor, you'll have to climb around using some unconventional platforms while in first person, and instead of dealing with a pretty smart AI that learns about your patterns, you'll be dealing with a human-controlled enemy who may be super dumb or super smart, but will at the very least be potentially distracted by the other kids helping you out. I have to say, I did not like Hello Neighbor, but I think it works a lot better as a multiplayer game. I think I would prefer playing Dead by Daylight or another game in the genre, as I was a bit overwhelmed by the layout of the house, the number of items I needed to find, and how much teamwork is required in a game where no one was really talking to each other. If you don't mind putting in some time to learn it and you have some friends you can get to play with you, this can be a fun game with some very tense moments. I know you're in there, and I know what's in the bundle this month.
Look, I don't think either of us wants to see each other again, but, Civ 6 is...
Are you seriously so stupid you aren't even gonna say my name while I'm right here at your door?
You're gonna make me call it Sid Meier's Civilization 6 in conversation? You wouldn't prefer I call it You Civilization 6?
Don't get smart with me. I'm here to tell you that if you review this game, I'm gonna do a lot worse to you than last time.
But it's in the bundle. If it's in the bundle, we have to review it. Damn, okay. What if we have Chris review it? He's played it for hundreds of hours. He's a huge fan.
Will he only say good things about it?
I mean, it's Chris. I have no idea what he's going to say, but if he's played it for that long, he's got to have something positive to say about it, right?
That is acceptable. You will not be harmed for now.
Thank God. I don't want to play that stupid game anyway.
What?
I'm sorry!
Sid Meier's Civilization 6 is a 4X strategy game from developer Firaxis Games and released in 2016. Civilization 6 is the latest entry in the long-standing strategy game series, so for anyone familiar with Civ games, you'll probably know what to expect here for the most part. You'll be building cities, growing them, researching new technology, making friends with your neighboring civilizations, or waging war in order to establish your place in history. Players can go for one of several victory conditions, including a military domination victory, a science-based victory, or even a tourism and culture-based victory, among several others. As is to be expected with this kind of game, there's a beefy tutorial system new players can go through to introduce themselves to the core concepts and turn-by-turn gameplay of this entry. Luckily, I'm already extremely familiar with both this series and especially this entry, so I can jump straight into some of the features and aspects new to Civ 6, and why I think some of them work and some of them don't. One of the aspects that the team at Firaxis wanted to focus on was breaking players out of their set routines. Often they found that players would play each and every game of Civilization about the same way according to that individual player's preferred style. While having a preferred method of victory is one thing, Firaxis noted that many players would just follow the exact same paths down the text tree, methods of expansion, and down the same road to victory they had been down 100 times or more. In order to try and get players to change things up, they made a few key changes. The first was to focus on the world map and its impact on playstyles. Depending on what geographical features are nearby to your towns, certain districts and buildings could get some very powerful bonuses, while depending on what civilization you're playing as, some buildings might not be able to be constructed at all. This requires players to pay close attention to their surroundings when founding a new city, especially at the start of the game. If you're trying to go for a science victory as Korea, for example, your starting city had better have some hills nearby, otherwise you won't be able to construct the starter science building. Knowing what your chosen civ is good at, and knowing how that playstyle interacts with the world environment is key to victory, especially at the higher difficulty levels. However, while this aspect does force some creative problem-solving decisions from players, it can make the beginning of the game very frustrating. Let's use the aforementioned Korea as an example. Because they're so good at science, especially early game, I'm almost always going to go for an early science boost if I pick that civ. However, if there's no good city spots nearby when I start a new game, it's almost always preferable to just restart the game in order to generate a new map and hopefully get a better starting area. You can get away with a bad start on some of the easier difficulties, but on harder levels, computer-controlled civs already have such a head start over the player that it's imperative you restart until you get a good location. The added focus on the map and environments also leads to a lot of information about each and every tile being available at every moment, which can be overwhelming for new players. Once you start to understand how to process and break down all this information, it is a very well-designed system that gives you a lot of information in an easy-to-skim format, but it takes some time to learn the visual language of this digital landscape. Luckily, there are a few community mods that help make this kind of information easier to see and parse through, and I highly recommend checking out Sucretak's simple UI adjustments in particular, as it totally changed how I planned my moves with the information given to me in this game. One other aspect of the game that has changed is the wide versus tall gameplay styles. Playing wide in a 4X game like Civilization involves you founding a lot of smaller cities, focusing on expanding the amount of ground you control as early as possible. Think of it sort of like a planet-wide Zerg rush. Playing tall, however, has you focusing on only a few cities, maybe even one, and improving it as much as possible. Both are usually viable approaches when it comes to most 4X games. However, with the limited amount of districts players are able to place, as well as the added focus on the map's resources, playing tall isn't as much of a valid strategy as it once was. This is one of my bigger personal gripes with the game, as the tall playstyle was always my preferred approach to Civilization. It's still possible to win with only a handful of cities, but it's much harder to pull off, especially on the higher difficulty levels, and it's clear the game wants to push you towards a wider style of play. It's not a huge issue in the grand scheme of things, but it would have been nice for the tall gameplay style to receive some more love this time around. Since this is the Platinum Edition of Civilization 6, players are also given both of the game's major expansions, Rise and Fall and Gathering Storm. Rise and Fall expanded on, what else, the rise and fall of civilizations. After each age, each civ has a chance of entering an enhanced golden age, giving them a variety of bonuses and boosts. However, fail to reach a certain threshold and you can fall into a dark age, making things much harder on your people, while also giving you access to some powerful but appropriately dark and twisted policies. It's a fun system that can really swing the balance of power at a moment's notice, and gives you a smaller, more immediate goal to work towards during each age. Gathering Storm brings climate change and natural disasters to the game. Floods, droughts, and volcanoes can ravage the land, damaging buildings as well as changing the landscape for better or worse. There's also a CO2 level for the entire world, which will rise as more and more civs begin to enter the industrial age, and eventually can be lowered by civs going green, utilizing more renewable energy, and researching different ways to help the environment. If you let the CO2 levels climb too high, the coast will begin to flood as the water level rises, permanently destroying certain tiles and islands. It adds a nice element of danger to the game, and makes you think even more about where you found your cities. That island might have a lot of nice resources now, but what if you're not able to build a flood wall before the whole thing is underwater? Then you're left with your own private Atlantis, and nobody really wants that. In case you can't tell, I really love Civilization 6. I've been a fan of this series since I played the first game on our home computer growing up in the early 90s, and Sid Meier has been robbing me of sleep ever since. While it's hard to argue with some of the hardcore fans that claim the series peaked with either entry 3 or 4, 6 brings so much to the table for both new and old fans that it's easy to recommend it to everyone. The Platinum Edition just makes the game even better, as both of the expansions add some really cool new gameplay elements that help to mix things up, and overall Civilization 6 is at its peak right now. I could nitpick a lot of the different smaller elements that I don't like that much, but it would be just that, nitpicking. Sid Meier's Civilization 6 is doing something right, as I've currently got around 300 hours in this game. If you're a fan of 4X games, this pick is a no-brainer. If you're not a fan, maybe pick it up anyway. There's a plethora of tutorials available, both in-game and community-made, to help you get into the game. I think it goes without saying, but I'll definitely be playing more of Civilization 6.
So overall, how was this month's bundle? I said it earlier, but it bears repeating. Humble, please highlight the Humble Originals more. Even just providing a link to the developer's webpage would be a massive improvement. Also, providing only a GOG key for a game that's available on Steam was a weird decision. I'm all for gamers having a choice of where they play their games, and providing a choice between a Steam key and a GOG key for all games that are on both platforms seems like it would be a great option. But if you're taking money to try and get more people using GOG, at the very least pick a game that isn't already also on Steam. Ikenfell is the latest game we've gotten a full copy of when it showed up previously as a sneak peek, and I'm happy to get the full games later, but Humble is actively training people not to buy their published games because they're so likely to show up in bundles sooner or later. Now, despite all my complaining, Panzer Paladin. Mwah! This is the reason I stay subscribed to Humble Choice. Those random games I've never heard of that take me totally by surprise.
For me, I was quite surprised by Desolate, and I'm excited to return to it with some gaming buddies. Worms, on the other hand, it was fun for the little time that I played of it, but I personally won't be going back. After seeing Austin play Panzer Paladin, I'm super excited to check that one out, and Going Under looks like a game right up my alley.
I'm in agreement that I can't wait to check out Panzer Paladin, as that game looks great. While there were some low points to this month, such as Worms Rumble and Paw Paw Paw, the Platinum Edition of Civilization 6 alone makes this a worthwhile bundle to pick up. Add in some indie flair with Panzer Paladin, and a dash of Lynchian weirdness with Milky Way Prince, and you've got a recipe for a great start to the summer.
If you're interested, here's a cost breakdown of each of the games.
I'd like to give a special shout out to Michael Slater, Blake Harms, and all of our patrons over on Patreon. Thank you, and thank everyone for watching.